Welcome back to Story for Night Sleep. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now get comfortable, relax your body, and let's begin. Story 1. I never planned to come back. I told myself that for years. I told myself it was safer to leave the forest alone, to let the stories stay stories. But the truth is, the forest had been speaking to me since the day my sister vanished. I grew up in a small town where the trees stood like silent witnesses. People said the woods were old, older than the town itself. They said the trees had names and the animals had memories. They said the forest did not forget. When my sister, Mara, disappeared, the police searched for 3 days. They called it a tragedy, a missing person case, a cautionary tale for kids who wandered too far. The town tried to move on. The forest did not. I remember the day she went missing like it was a wound I could still feel. We were 14. We were fearless in the way only teenagers can be fearless. We had dared each other to walk to the old logging road, the one that cut through the thickest part of the forest. It was a place nobody went anymore because the road had collapsed, and the old logging camp was nothing but rotting boards and rusted nails. We reached the road. We laughed. We heard the wind in the trees and thought it sounded like voices. Mara turned her head toward the sound and she smiled. Then she walked into the trees and she never came back. I don't remember running. I only remember the moment I realized she was gone. I remember the way the forest went quiet, like it had swallowed her whole. I remember my own voice echoing through the trees as I screamed her name, and how the trees didn't answer. Years passed. I grew up. I moved away. I tried to build a life without her. I tried to be the kind of person who didn't need closure. But the forest kept calling. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a dream. It was a feeling, a tug in my chest every time I passed a tree line or saw a road that disappeared into shadows. I started waking up in the middle of the night with the same thought, the same sentence on repeat in my mind. Go back. That's how I found myself standing on the edge of the old logging road with a backpack and a flashlight and a heartbeat that sounded like a drum. The air was colder than I remembered. The trees looked taller. The shadows looked deeper. The forest seemed to lean toward me as if it had been waiting. I told myself it was just nerves. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself I was here for a closure that would never come. But the forest didn't care about my excuses. I took my first step onto the road, and the sound of my boots on the cracked dirt felt too loud, like a warning. As I walked, I kept looking back over my shoulder. I expected to see a car or a neighbor or someone who would tell me I was making a mistake. But there was nothing, just trees, just silence, just the sense that the forest was watching me. I was halfway to the old logging camp when I saw something that made my skin tighten. A pale figure stood between 2 trees, just beyond the edge of the road. It looked like a person, but the shape was wrong. It was too thin, too still, too clean. It was a ghost. I froze. My flashlight shook in my hand. The figure did not move. It did not blink. It simply stared. I didn't know if I was supposed to be afraid or relieved. The thing about ghosts is that you never know if they are there to help or to hurt. You never know if they are trapped or if they are hunting. The ghost lifted its head slightly, and I saw its face. It was Mara. It was my sister. But it wasn't the Mara I remembered. Her eyes were hollow, like someone had emptied them. Her skin looked pale and thin, like paper. Her mouth was closed, but the expression was not sadness. It was something else, something empty. She looked right at me, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. Then she turned and stepped deeper into the trees. I didn't move. I couldn't. I watched her disappear into the forest as if the trees were swallowing her. Then the silence returned. I wanted to chase her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, But my feet stayed rooted to the ground, and my heart kept beating, and the forest waited. I took a shaky breath and followed. The old logging camp was worse than I remembered. Not because of the decay, but because of the feeling. It felt like a place that had been abandoned in a hurry. Like people had left without taking their lives with them. The buildings were collapsed, but the foundation stones were still there. Rusted equipment lay half buried in moss. The air smelled like damp wood and old metal. I walked slowly, my flashlight beam moving over the wreckage. Every sound seemed amplified. My breath, the wind, the distant creak of a tree limb. Then I heard something else, a faint voice, like a whisper carried on the wind. Eli. I stopped so fast my knees nearly buckled. The voice was soft. It sounded like Mara. I turned in every direction, but there was nothing. Just the broken camp and the trees and the shadows. I whispered, "Mara?" Silence. Then the voice came again, clearer. "Eli, come closer." My throat went dry. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave. I wanted to pretend this was all in my head. But I couldn't. I stepped forward, and the voice grew louder, as if it was guiding me. I followed the sound until I reached the remains of the main building. The roof had collapsed. The walls were broken. Inside, the ground was covered in debris and leaves. In the center of the room, a small figure stood. It wasn't a ghost this time. It was a child. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a faded dress. Her hair was messy, and her face was pale. She looked at me with eyes that seemed too old for her face. "Do you see it?" she asked. "See what?" I said. She pointed to the far corner of the room. I turned my flashlight toward it. There was a shape there, something crouched in the darkness. It was not human. It was not animal. It was something that did not belong. It looked like a creature made of shadows, but it had a shape that was almost familiar, like a person that had been twisted. Its head was too large. Its limbs were too long. Its body seemed to bend at angles that should not be possible. It was watching me. I felt the air around me change. The temperature dropped. My skin prickled. The girl whispered, "It likes to watch." I took a step back. The creature did not move. It just stared. Then the girl said, "It takes the ones who are lost." I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" she smiled. And it was the kind of smile that doesn't belong on a child. "I'm the one who stayed." The words hit me like a punch. I felt a surge of anger and grief and fear all at once. "Mara?" I asked. The girl shook her head. "No, not your sister, but she came here." She came close. My hands trembled. I wanted to reach for my phone, to call someone, to do anything to prove this was real. But my phone had no signal. Of course it didn't. The girl stepped closer to me, and the air around her felt heavy, like the forest itself was leaning in. "Do you know why it's called the cryptic?" she asked. I shook my head. She said, "Because it hides in plain sight. Because it looks like what you want to see. Because it can change." My stomach twisted. I thought of Mara. I thought of her smile. I thought of the way she had looked at the trees like they were alive. I asked, "Is she here?" The girl's eyes flicked toward the creature. "It's not her," she said, "but it can make her look like her." The creature shifted slightly, and the darkness around it seemed to ripple. It was subtle, but I saw it. I saw a face in the shadows. For a moment, I thought it was Mara. For a moment, I felt relief. Then the face changed. It wasn't Mara. It was someone else. Someone I didn't know. Someone whose eyes were empty. I realized with a sudden sickening clarity that the creature was not just watching. It was practicing. It was learning. It was trying to become something that could lure me deeper. The girl said, "You have to leave." I shook my head. "I can't. I need to know what happened." The girl's expression softened. "Then you will see, but you will not like what you see." I wanted to ask her more questions, but the creature moved. It stepped out of the darkness. It didn't walk. It seemed to glide. Its long limbs unfolded, and its head tilted, as if it were studying me. It made no sound. The girl took a step back, and her smile disappeared. "Don't look at it," she whispered. I tried to look away, but my eyes were drawn to it, like a magnet. The creature's face shifted again, and this time it looked like my sister. Mara's face appeared in the shadows, smiling at me. I felt my heart leap. "Mara," I whispered. The creature's voice came out of the darkness, and it sounded like her. "Eli," it said, "you found me." The words were perfect. The tone, the cadence, the way she always said my name. I took a step forward without thinking. The girl screamed, "No!" But it was too late. The creature reached out with one long, thin arm. I felt a cold touch on my wrist. I felt a pain that was not physical. It was like someone had grabbed my memory and squeezed. The world went dark for a moment. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the camp. I was standing in the middle of the forest, but it felt different. The trees were closer. The shadows were deeper. The air was thick with fog. I was alone. Or so I thought. The fog was not like normal fog. It was thick, almost viscous. It clung to my skin and made it hard to breathe. It made the forest feel like a dream. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. I saw the old logging road in the distance, but it looked farther away than it should have. It looked like it had moved. I tried to walk toward it, but the fog seemed to shift. The trees seemed to move. The path I thought I was on disappeared and reappeared like it was playing a trick on me. I realized something that made my blood run cold. The forest was changing around me. It was not just the fog. It was the way the trees looked, the way the ground felt, the way the air sounded. It was like the forest was rearranging itself to keep me inside. I stopped and listened. I heard voices. Not the wind, not animals. Voices. I couldn't make out words at first. It sounded like a crowd, a whispering mass of voices all overlapping. Then one voice rose above the others. "Mara." I froze. The voice was my sister's. I turned toward the sound. Through the fog, I saw a figure standing between two trees. It was her. It was Mara. She looked like she did the day she disappeared. Her hair was messy. Her face was dirty. Her eyes were wide. She was alive. Or she was a ghost. Or she was the creature. I didn't know which, but I didn't care. I ran toward her. "Mara!" I shouted. She turned, and her face lit up like a candle. "Eli," she said, "you came back." I reached out to grab her, but the moment my fingers touched her, she vanished. The fog swallowed her like she had never been there. I fell to my knees, panting, feeling the ache of loss all over again. I whispered, "No, no, no, no." The voices in the fog grew louder. They were calling my name. They were calling her name. They were calling names I didn't recognize. I realized the voices were not just voices, they were memories. The forest was full of them. I stood up, shaking, and started walking again. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I had to keep moving. As I walked, the fog began to thin. The trees began to look more normal. But the feeling of being watched never left. Then I saw something that made me stop. A small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a stone marker, half buried in moss. It looked like a grave marker. I approached it slowly, my flashlight beam trembling. The stone was worn, but I could still make out the letters. Mara Hawkins missing. The date was the day she disappeared. My hands went cold. I stared at the marker, and the forest around me seemed to hush. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Do you see it now?" I turned. The girl from the logging camp was standing there. She looked older, or maybe the fog was making her look older. Her eyes were still too old for her face. She pointed to the stone marker. "It isn't a grave," she said. "It's a door." "A door to what?" I asked. She shrugged. "To the place where the cryptic keeps them." I swallowed hard. "Keeps who?" She looked at me with a strange expression. It was almost pity. "Lost ones," she said. "The ones who never made it out." My throat tightened. "I don't understand," I said. The girl stepped closer. "It's not about understanding," she said. "It's about surviving." She turned her head, looking past me into the trees. "Listen," she whispered. I listened. I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. It was the sound of someone breathing. Slow, deliberate breaths. Close. Too close. I turned slowly, and the creature was there. It was standing behind me, just beyond the edge of the clearing. It was taller than the trees. Its limbs were bent at angles that looked wrong. Its head was tilted, as if it were curious. It looked like a person, but not. It looked like a shadow wearing a human body. It smiled. Or at least it tried to. The girl whispered, "It wants you to see what you want to see." I felt the fog around me shift. The air grew heavy. The creature took a step forward. And the forest around us changed. The trees melted away, replaced by something else. I was standing in a room I knew, my childhood bedroom. The walls were the same color. The bed was the same. The posters on the wall were the same. I looked down at my hands. They were my hands. I looked up at the window. It was daytime. The sun was shining. I could hear my mother laughing in the kitchen. I could hear my father's voice. I could smell pancakes. I could smell home. I felt my chest fill with warmth. The creature was behind me, but I didn't see it, because I was in my memory, and the creature was using it to lure me. I walked toward the bed, tears in my eyes. I sat down. I closed my eyes. I could feel the world around me fading. I could feel the forest pulling me back. I opened my eyes. The room was gone. The fog was back. The creature was in front of me. It was smiling, and I realized the truth. The creature wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to trap me. It was trying to keep me in the place where I was happiest. So it could feed, the girl whispered. It feeds on what you miss. I looked at her. How do I stop it? She shook her head. You don't stop it. You survive it. The creature moved closer. The fog thickened, and the voices in the forest grew louder. The forest shifted again, and I found myself standing on the edge of a path I didn't recognize. The trees were taller here, and the shadows were deeper. The fog had thinned, but the air still felt heavy. I looked around, trying to find the logging road. Instead, I saw something else. A line of figures standing between the trees. Ghosts. Not one or two. A whole line of them. They were all different ages, different faces, different clothes. Some looked like children. Some looked like old men. Some looked like women. They were all staring at me. Their eyes were empty, but their expressions were not. Some looked sad. Some looked angry. Some looked terrified. They were all trapped in the forest. The girl stepped beside me. They're the ones it took, she said. I felt my stomach twist. How many? She shrugged. More than you can count. One of the ghosts stepped forward. It was a man in a flannel shirt, with a beard and tired eyes. He looked at me and said, "You shouldn't be here." I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" He looked at me like I was stupid. "I'm someone who didn't make it out." I felt a chill. "Why are you here?" The man's eyes flicked toward the trees. "Because the cryptic doesn't let us leave." I looked toward the trees. The creature was not visible, but I could feel it. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. The man said, "It takes our memories. It takes our faces. It takes our names. It keeps us here until it forgets us." The girl's voice was quiet. "And then it makes us into something else." I looked at the ghosts again. I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Some of them had faint, dark shapes around their heads, like shadows clinging to them, like something was attached. The man noticed me staring. He said, "Those are the parts it keeps, the parts it needs to feed." I felt my heart pound. I asked, "Can they see it?" The man shook his head. "No, not really. It hides itself. It makes us look like we are in a dream. It makes us forget we are dead." I felt a wave of nausea. The girl whispered, "It can't stand light." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She pointed to the sky. The fog was thinning, and I could see a faint glow. "Daylight," she said. "It can't be around daylight. It hates it." I looked toward the horizon. The glow was not sunlight. It was something else. A pale, unnatural light, like the forest was glowing from within. The ghosts began to move. They drifted closer to me, their faces blank, their eyes empty. The man in the flannel shirt said, "You need to go." "Now?" I asked. "What about Mara?" The man's expression softened. "She's close, but you have to be careful. The cryptic can make her look real." The girl said, "You have to find the place where it keeps her." I asked, "Where is that?" The girl pointed deeper into the forest. "There," she said. "The hollow." I looked in the direction she pointed. The trees there were twisted. The ground was darker. The air felt heavier. The creature was there. I could feel it. The ghosts began to drift away, back into the trees. The man in the flannel shirt looked at me one last time. He said, "If you go in, don't trust what you see." Then he was gone. The girl turned to me. "You have to go now," she said. I nodded. I walked toward the hollow. The hollow was a place where the trees grew close together, their branches intertwining like fingers. The ground was soft, like it had been trampled for years. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and old leaves. The fog was almost gone here. The forest felt older, more alive, like it had been waiting for me. I moved slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The creature was not visible, but I could feel it. I could feel its attention. The hollow opened into a small clearing. In the center was a large, ancient tree. Its trunk was wide and gnarled. Its roots spread out like veins. At the base of the tree was a hole, a dark hole. It looked like a doorway. I felt my skin prickle. I knew this was the place. I took a deep breath and stepped closer. The air around the hole was cold. It felt like the inside of a freezer. I shone my flashlight into the hole. It was deeper than it should be. It looked like it went on forever. I heard a voice from inside. Eli. It was Mara. My heart jumped. I leaned closer. Mara? I called. The voice answered. You found me. I felt tears in my eyes. I wanted to reach into the hole. I wanted to pull her out. But the girl's voice echoed in my mind. Don't trust what you see. I looked at the hole again. The darkness inside seemed to shift. A shape moved. It looked like a hand. It reached out. I stepped back. The hand disappeared. The voice inside the hole whispered, Eli, please. I felt my heart break. I stepped closer again. Mara, I'm here, I said. The voice whispered, come down. I felt a wave of dizziness. The forest around me seemed to sway. The creature was near. I felt its hunger. I took a step back. The girl's voice was in my ear, but she wasn't there. You can't trust it, she whispered. It's using her. I shook my head. No, I know it's her. The voice inside the hole laughed softly. It is her, it said, but she is not what you think. The air around me grew colder. The shadows deepened. The creature stepped out of the trees. It stood at the edge of the clearing, watching me. It looked like a person. It looked like a person with my sister's face. But the face was wrong. It was too perfect, too still. It smiled. It said, You found the door. I swallowed hard. Where is she? The creature's eyes flicked to the hole. She is here, it said. With me. I felt a surge of anger. Let her go. The creature tilted its head. I can't, it said. She belongs to the forest now. I felt my hands shake. She doesn't belong to you. The creature's smile widened. She belongs to me. The girl's voice echoed in my mind again. Don't trust what you see. I looked at the creature. I looked at the hole. I thought of my sister's face. I thought of her voice. I thought of the way she used to laugh. I realized something. The creature wasn't holding her. The creature was holding my memory of her. It was holding my love. It was holding my grief. It was holding the part of me that couldn't let her go. And it was using it. I stepped closer to the hole again. The voice inside whispered, Eli, please, come down. I shook my head. No, the creature's eyes narrowed. You will, it said, or you will stay here forever. The forest around me seemed to lean in. The shadows moved. The fog thickened. I felt the creature's hunger like a weight on my chest. I took a deep breath and made a choice. I turned away from the hole. I turned away from the creature. I walked toward the edge of the clearing. The girl's voice whispered, "You can't leave her." I stopped. I turned back. The creature was watching me. The hole was dark. The voice inside whispered, "Eli, please." I stood there, torn between love and fear. And then I heard something else. A voice I hadn't heard in years. My mother's voice. "Eli." I froze. I looked around. The forest shifted. The trees parted, and I saw a figure standing in the distance. It was my mother. She looked like she did when I was a child. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was tired, but she was smiling. She was real. Or she was a memory. Or she was the creature. She called my name again. "Eli, come home." I felt my heart ache. I took a step toward her. The creature's voice hissed. "Don't," the girl whispered. "Don't go." I stopped. I looked at my mother. She smiled. "Come home," she said. I felt the pull. I felt the love. I felt the longing, and I realized the creature was not just feeding on fear. It was feeding on everything I had lost. It was feeding on my need to belong. It was feeding on my need to be loved. It was feeding on my memories. I took a deep breath. I turned away from my mother. I turned away from the hole. I turned away from the creature. I walked back into the forest. The forest changed again. The trees grew closer together. The path became narrow. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist. I felt like I was walking through a maze. I couldn't tell if I was going deeper into the forest or if the forest was moving around me. The air was cold. My breath came out in white puffs. The voices in the trees grew louder. They were not just whispering now. They were calling out, calling names, calling memories, calling things I didn't want to remember. I kept walking, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I saw the ghosts again. They were closer now. They drifted around me like a swarm. They didn't touch me. They just watched. Their eyes were empty, but their presence was heavy. I felt like I was being judged. I felt like I was being tested. The girl's voice echoed in my mind. "It wants you to break," I asked out loud. "What happens if I break?" The girl didn't answer. The ghosts did. One of them, a woman with long hair and a torn dress, floated closer. She looked at me with sadness. She said, "It will take you." I felt my heart race. "How?" I asked. The woman's eyes flicked toward the trees. "It will show you what you want," she said. "It will show you your sister. It will show you your mother. It will show you home." I felt my throat tighten. The woman continued, "And when you reach for it, it will pull you in." I swallowed hard. I asked, "How do I stop it?" The woman's expression hardened. "You don't," she said. "You survive it." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around. The creature was behind me. It was closer than before. It was smiling. It said, "You are tired." I felt my knees weaken. I shook my head. No. The creature stepped closer. "You are weak," it said. "You are lonely. You are lost." I felt a surge of anger. "I am not weak." The creature tilted its head. "You are," it said, "and you will come to me." I took a step back. The forest around us shifted. The path changed. The trees moved. The world felt like it was bending. The creature's voice softened. "You don't have to fight," it said. "You can just come." I felt the pull again. I saw a flash of my sister's face. I heard her voice. "Eli." I felt tears in my eyes. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to hold her. I wanted to believe she was real. But the woman ghost whispered, "Don't." The girl's voice echoed, "It is not her." I took a deep breath. I forced myself to look away. I forced myself to focus on the path. I forced myself to keep moving. The creature followed. It didn't chase me. It didn't run. It simply walked, as if it knew I would never truly escape. I walked for what felt like hours. The forest never ended. The path never became clear. The shadows never lifted, and the voices never stopped. Then, suddenly, the forest opened. I was standing at the edge of a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large old cabin. It looked like it had been built a long time ago. The wood was dark and weathered. The windows were broken. The door was slightly ajar. A faint light glowed inside. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing. It watched me. The girl's voice whispered, "That's where it keeps them." I walked toward the cabin. The air grew colder. The light inside flickered. I stepped onto the porch. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was dark. The air smelled like dust and old wood. The light was coming from a small fireplace in the corner. There was a chair in front of it, and in the chair sat a figure, a person, a woman, my sister, Mara. She was alive. She was real. She was smiling. She looked at me with eyes full of love. "Eli," she said, "you found me." I felt my heart leap. I ran toward her. But the moment I reached the chair, the room shifted. The walls moved. The floor changed. The light flickered. And the woman in the chair changed. Her face twisted. Her smile became a grimace. Her eyes went empty. The creature's voice echoed in the room. "She's mine," it said. The woman in the chair spoke in a voice that was not hers. "Eli," she said, "come closer." I felt my stomach twist. I stepped back. The creature appeared behind the chair. It leaned in close. It whispered, "She wants you." I felt my heart pound. I realized the truth. The creature wasn't holding my sister. It was holding a memory of her. It was holding a version of her that I could never reach, and it was using that version to lure me in. I felt tears in my eyes. I whispered, "Mara, if you're real, tell me." The woman in the chair smiled. "Eli," she said, "I'm here." The creature's voice hissed. "She is not here. She is a story." I felt the room spin. I felt the forest closing in. I felt the creature's hunger. I realized I was standing at the edge of something I could not escape. The cabin felt like it was closing in on me. The walls seemed to breathe. The floor creaked beneath my feet. I looked at the woman in the chair. She looked like my sister, but she was not. Her eyes were too empty. Her smile was too perfect. She was a mask. I took a step back. The creature moved closer. It spoke softly. "You want her?" I shook my head. "No." The creature's smile widened. "You do," it said. "You want to hold on to her. You want to keep her safe. You want to bring her back." I felt my throat tighten. I couldn't deny it. I wanted all those things. The creature continued, "I can give her to you. I can give you everything you lost." I felt my knees weaken. I looked at the woman in the chair. She whispered, "Eli." I felt my heart ache. I asked, "Is this real?" The creature laughed softly. "Real enough," it said. "Real enough to make you stay." I closed my eyes. I thought of my sister. I thought of her smile. I thought of her laugh. I thought of the way she used to say my name. I thought of the way the forest had swallowed her. I thought of the way I had never stopped looking. I opened my eyes. The woman in the chair was still smiling. The creature was still watching. The forest was still waiting. I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath. I stepped forward. I grabbed the chair. I pulled it away from the fireplace. I dragged it toward the door. The creature hissed. "No, I didn't stop." I dragged the chair out of the cabin. The moment the chair crossed the threshold, the cabin trembled. The walls shook. The floor cracked. The light flickered. The woman in the chair screamed, but it wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of anger. The creature lunged. It tried to stop me, but I kept going. I dragged the chair into the clearing. The forest seemed to react. The trees swayed. The shadows shifted. The fog thickened. The voices in the forest grew louder. I felt the creature's hunger like a weight on my chest. I felt my strength fading, but I kept going. I dragged the chair toward the old logging road. I could see the road in the distance now. It looked closer. It looked like a way out. The creature was right behind me. It reached out. Its long fingers brushed my shoulder. I felt a cold shock. I stumbled. I almost fell, but I didn't. I kept going. I dragged the chair onto the road. The moment I stepped onto the road, the forest seemed to recoil. The fog lifted, the shadows retreated. The air warmed. The voices faded. The creature stopped. It didn't follow me onto the road. It stayed in the trees. It watched. I looked back. I saw the creature standing at the edge of the forest. It was still smiling. It was still watching, but it was not moving. I looked at the chair. The woman in the chair was gone. The chair was empty. The forest was silent. I stood on the old logging road, breathing hard. I looked at the stone marker. Mara Hawkins missing. I realized something. The forest had not released my sister. It had released me. It had released my memory. It had released my grief. It had released my need to hold on to her. And in doing so, it had taken something else. It had taken the part of me that was trapped in the forest, the part of me that had been lost, the part of me that had been feeding the creature. I felt a strange emptiness, not sadness, not relief, just emptiness. I stood there for a long time, listening to the forest. The trees were quiet. The shadows were still. The air was calm. The creature was gone, or at least it was no longer in sight. I looked down the road. The way back to the town was clear. I could leave. I could go home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still watching, that the creature was still there, that it was waiting. I started walking. The walk back to the town felt longer than it should have. The road seemed to stretch on forever. The trees stood like silent guards. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the creature following me, but it never did. The forest stayed behind me. The fog stayed away. The air felt normal again. I started to believe I was safe. Then I heard a voice. Soft, familiar. Eli. I froze. The voice was my sister's, but it was coming from behind me. I turned slowly. There she was, Mara, standing on the side of the road just beyond the trees. She looked real. She looked alive. She looked like she was waiting for me. My heart leapt. I started to walk toward her. Mara, I shouted. She smiled. Eli, she said. You came back. I reached out to grab her. The moment my fingers touched her, she vanished. The forest swallowed her. I felt my heart drop. I felt the cold grip of the creature's hunger. I realized the truth. The creature had followed me. It had been waiting for me to think I was safe. It had been waiting for me to reach for her. I looked into the trees. The shadows shifted. The creature stepped out. It was closer now. It stood on the edge of the road watching me. It smiled. It said, You cannot leave. I felt my chest tighten. I took a step back. The creature took a step forward. The air grew cold. The shadows grew deeper. The road seemed to narrow. I felt trapped. I realized the creature was not just in the forest. It was in the road. It was in the air. It was in the memories. It was in me. I took a deep breath. I forced myself to think. The girl's voice echoed in my mind. It can't stand light. I looked up. The sky was dark. It was night. The stars were out. The moon was full. I realized the moonlight was bright enough. The creature's eyes narrowed. It hissed. The shadows around it seemed to shrink. The creature stepped back. It didn't like the light. I took a step forward. I walked toward the town. The creature followed, but it stayed in the shadows. I kept walking. I kept moving. I didn't look back. I didn't reach for her. I didn't let the memories pull me in. The town lights grew closer. The forest thinned. The road opened up. I felt the weight on my chest lighten. I felt the hunger fade. I felt the emptiness return. But I kept walking. I reached the edge of town. The street lights flickered. The air felt warm. The forest was behind me. I turned once, just to look. The creature was still there, at the edge of the trees. It was watching. It was waiting. It was not gone. It never would be. But I was safe for now. I walked into town. I'm telling you this now because I need to get it out of me. I need to say it out loud. I need to confess what happened in the forest. I need to confess what the cryptic is. I need to confess what it did to me. The forest didn't take my sister. The forest took my grief. The forest took my need to hold on to her. The cryptic feeds on that need. It feeds on the part of us that cannot let go. It feeds on the memories we cannot bear to lose. It feeds on the stories we tell ourselves to keep the dead alive. It hides in the shadows. It hides in the fog. It hides in the places where we are most vulnerable. It hides in the parts of us that are broken, and it waits. It waits for someone like me. Someone who cannot move on. Someone who will do anything to see a lost face again. Someone who will follow a ghost into the dark. I know now that the ghosts in the forest were real. They were trapped. They were not illusions. They were not dreams. They were people. People who had been taken. People who had been turned into memories. People who had been made into something the cryptic could use. I saw them, I heard them, I felt them, and I know they are still there. I know the cryptic is still there. I know it is still waiting. And I know that if I ever go back, it will be there, smiling, ready to give me what I want, ready to give me my sister, ready to give me my mother, ready to give me my home, ready to give me my memories. But I won't go back. I won't let it take me. I won't let it feed on me. I won't let it win. That is my confession. That is my story. And if you ever find yourself near a forest that feels too old, too quiet, too hungry, if you ever hear a voice calling your name in the dark, if you ever see a face you miss in the shadows, don't follow it. Don't go deeper. Don't let the cryptic make you believe you are not alone, because it will give you what you want, and it will take everything you are. Story 2. I first heard the stories of Greybridge Marsh on a winter night that seemed far too dark for its own good. The kind of night where sound carries strangely, where every road looks older than it truly is, where you can feel a history you were never meant to know pressing against the back of your thoughts. The stories came from an old surveyor named Harris, a man with a voice roughened by wind and loneliness. He spoke of a village hidden deep beyond the wetlands, a place that once appeared on maps and then didn't, a place swallowed by its own land, Greybridge. Some said it was abandoned, some said it was erased. But Harris insisted that the marsh itself had grown hungry, and the people had simply given way. He never stayed long when telling these things. He would always fall quiet and glance at the window, as if worried the marsh had followed him into the room. Maybe that should have been my warning. But warnings rarely stop the curious, and they never stop the lonely. I set out toward Greybridge in early October, when the cool air sharpens the senses and the tree line begins to thin into skeletal shapes. The road leading there was barely a road at all, more of a suggestion carved between miles of reeds that rustled like whispering strangers. Every mile forward, the sounds of the world changed. Crickets grew faint. Bird calls disappeared. Wind moved through the grass in long, uneven breaths. It felt as if the marsh was listening. I kept driving until the asphalt ended abruptly, replaced by an uneven stretch of forgotten dirt. An old sign leaned off to the side. Its lettering faded into an orange-brown ghost of what once might have read Greybridge. Beyond it, the path narrowed into a corridor of sagging trees whose branches bent low, as if trying to touch the ground. Their silhouettes wavered in the late afternoon light, merging and separating like figures in quiet conversation. I slowed the car, more out of instinct than caution. The air had taken on a stillness that felt unnatural, a stillness that seemed to swallow every small noise the engine made. I parked near the remains of a stone archway. Time had chewed through it, leaving only 2 uneven pillars and a broken slab across the top. Someone had carved symbols into the stone, not letters, not patterns I recognized. They looked like circles that had lost their way, the kind that almost resembled faces, but not quite human ones. When I stepped out of the car, the ground beneath me felt soft, not muddy, not firm, something in between, as if the earth hadn't decided what it wanted to be. I took one step deeper into the marsh, then another. The reeds shook softly, though no breeze crossed the water. The silence was so complete that I heard my own breath louder than usual. After maybe 10 minutes of walking, I reached the first structure, a house that looked as though it had sagged under its own memories. Its roof curved inward, its windows clouded with thick dust, its doorway leaning forward like a mouth about to speak. There were no signs of life, no footprints, no movement inside, but the door was open. Not fully, just a narrow sliver, as if someone had slipped inside not long before I arrived. I called out to see if anyone remained. My voice drifted into the house and returned to me softer, thinner, as if it had been stretched before given back. No answer. Only the rustle of reeds behind me. Though the air still refused to move, I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, long and aching, like something waking from a deep sleep. Inside, dust floated in slow spirals. The walls were covered in peeling paint. Furniture remained, but draped in sheets stiff with time. There was a smell of old wood, old water, and something else. Something faint and sweet that made the back of my tongue tingle. I stepped into what must have been the living room. A faded portrait hung above a cracked fireplace. A family stood in front of a marsh in the background, but their faces were blurred with age. Their eyes, though, had held their color, pale gray, almost white. Something shifted behind me, not loudly, just enough for the air to change shape. When I turned, nothing was there, nothing visible, but I felt watched, not by the house, by the marsh itself pressing against the walls, waiting to be let inside. I left quickly, stepping back into the cool air and trying to steady my breath. As I reached the porch steps, I saw something carved into one of the wooden posts. It was deeper than the natural wear of time, a deliberate mark etched into the grain. A circle. A single, uneven circle. The same shape carved into the archway stone. The same shape that looked almost like an eye. I walked further into what remained of the village. Greybridge was larger than Harris made it sound. Dozens of structures, each waiting in silence. Some collapsed, some standing like hollow sentinels. The marsh water had crept up through the streets, pooling in dark patches that reflected the dimming sky. As I walked, the surface quivered, as if something beneath it stirred at my presence. I reached the old church near the village center, its steeple split, leaning like a snapped bone. Moss covered most of the outer walls. The windows were shattered, leaving jagged shapes that resembled open mouths. A stone path led toward the entrance. Along it, small objects lay half submerged in the mud. Items left behind in haste or ritual. A child's carved wooden doll, a rusted lantern, a row of small stones arranged in a circle. The air thickened around me. Something tugged lightly at my attention, leading my eyes toward the church door. It wasn't open, it wasn't closed. It simply waited, as though the marsh had been expecting me. I stepped closer. The church bell tower gave a low groan, metal shifting against windless air. I placed my hand on the door. Cold, colder than the October air, colder than the water pooled nearby. I pushed gently, and the door eased inward without resistance, as if someone on the other side had been holding it lightly, waiting for me to enter. I stepped inside. The interior was dark, but not empty. Wooden pews stretched into shadows. The air carried a faint hum, not mechanical, not natural, more like a voice too soft to understand. In the center aisle lay a book, its pages swollen from water, its ink faded but not fully erased. A few words remained on the open page. "Come back to us." At first I thought I misread it. Then I realized the ink had run, dripping in thin trails downward, as if the words had been soaked recently. As I stepped closer, I heard that faint hum again, rising just slightly. Then something touched my ankle. Cold, wet, deliberate. I jerked backward. The floor was dry. Nothing had reached me. But the sensation lingered, clinging like a memory that hadn't happened yet. I steadied myself against a pew, breathing in sharp, uneven breaths. Then I saw it, at the far end of the church. Near the altar, a figure stood half in shadow, half lost to the gloom, tall still, watching me with the patience of something that had been waiting a very long time. Its outline flickered, blending with the darkness behind it. Not moving, not speaking, just present. The air around me tightened. My throat felt heavy, and the hum in the room shifted from faint to familiar. It was the sound of someone breathing, my own, and something else breathing with me, closer, right behind that figure at the altar. I stepped back. The figure did not follow. Instead, it raised one arm slowly as though pointing towards something behind me. I turned. There was nothing but rows of pews, and yet the hum behind me had grown louder. More steps, more breath, more presence. I turned back toward the altar. The figure was gone. Only the dark remained. The hum faded, but not completely. It sank into the floorboards, into the walls, into the air itself. I backed out of the church, step by careful step, until the door closed behind me with a muffled thud that echoed far too long. As I stood outside, the last threads of daylight slipped below the horizon, and the marsh awakened, not loudly, just noticeably. The reeds shifted, the water trembled, and from somewhere deeper inside the village, a soft call drifted across the darkening air. A long, low sound, not human, not exactly, but calling me by name. Night in Greybridge settled quickly, not gently, not gradually. It descended like a curtain pulled tight across the sky. The last traces of daylight slipped into the marsh, and the darkness that replaced them felt thicker than it should have been, as if it had weight, as if it was something old returning to a familiar place. I stood in the open space near the church, listening to the shifting reeds and the soft tremble of distant water. The air carried that lingering hum, like a voice buried beneath the sound of the night. Then the call came again, long, low, shaped enough like my name to unsettle me. I stayed still, trying to determine the direction. The sound drifted from deeper within the village, past the last row of leaning houses. It carried an uneasy rhythm, as though spoken by something that knew my name, but not how to form it cleanly. I should have left, I knew that much. But the call tugged at my thoughts like a thread pulled through cloth. Something wanted me to follow. So I walked. The path wound between sinking buildings and patches of dark water. Thin mist drifted along the ground in slow rolls, curling around my ankles with a cold, lingering touch. A lantern hung from a tilted post ahead, swaying without wind. Its glass was cracked, but a faint glow clung to the wick inside, as if refusing to die. I moved toward it. The air around the lantern felt warmer, almost comforting, almost. Beneath it lay another circle marked in the mud, a perfect ring of stones, each one smoothed by water. At the center of the ring, a smaller stone had been placed upright. It pointed toward the far side of the village, toward the marsh that stretched endlessly beyond the last houses. Then I noticed something else. Footprints, not fresh, not old, just there, imprinted in the mud in a single line. Too small to belong to an adult, too deep to belong to a child, and spaced too far apart to be entirely human. The prints led directly toward the far end of the village, toward the marsh. I followed. The houses became fewer as I walked, each one leaning back from the path as though recoiling from something ahead. Their doors hung open, not in welcome, but in surrender. Near the last house I saw a wooden marker standing in the ground, a simple post carved with more of those uneven circles, some intertwined, some open, some overlapping like chained eyes. Harris never mentioned symbols. He only spoke of the village vanishing beneath the marsh, but symbols meant ritual, symbols meant belief, symbols meant the people here had known something approached long before it arrived. The footprints led past the marker toward the edge of the marsh. The water before me reflected the moonlight in strange patterns, swirling as though stirred from below. I stepped closer. The soft mud beneath my feet sank slightly, swallowing my weight with a quiet sigh. Beyond the water, tall reeds swayed in slow, uneven motions. Not with wind, with something else, something moving through them. The sound grew clearer, a slow, dragging movement, reeds parting, water shifting. Something approached. I stood still, listening to its rhythm. Then the call came again, not behind me, not from the village, from the water. My name, almost spoken, almost shaped, almost real. The surface rippled. I took a slow step back. The ripples thickened into patterns that resembled fingers pressing up from beneath the water, tracing shapes across the surface. Circles, the same uneven circles carved across the village. My breath tightened. The water stilled. Then a voice rose from beneath the surface. Not loud, not clear, barely formed at all, like a memory trying to speak. Come back. Not a command. Not a threat. A plea. The same words written in the book inside the church. Come back. The water shuddered, and something pale drifted upward, a shape, a reflection of a reflection. Two pale eyes staring up from beneath the surface. I stepped backward again, but the mud sucked at my feet, holding me still. The eyes rose closer, then stopped, not threatening, not advancing, waiting. The reeds behind me rustled sharply, and I turned just as something slipped between them. A figure moving on the edge of sight, too slender, too tall, its shoulders uneven, as if its limbs remembered their shape imperfectly. It drifted from one patch of reeds to the next, each movement silent but deliberate. I held my breath. The figure stilled. Its head turned toward me, though I could not make out its features. Then it raised one arm, slowly. The same gesture the figure inside the church had made, pointing, but not at me, past me, toward the marsh water. I turned back. The pale eyes beneath the surface had vanished. The water was still, too still. When I looked again, the figure in the reeds was gone. No movement, no trace, only silence, the kind that carries weight, the kind that waits for choices to be made. I pulled my feet free of the mud and stepped back toward the village. The path seemed narrower than before, the houses leaning closer as if eager to listen. When I reached the first row of buildings again, a soft sound followed me. A second set of footsteps, matching mine, but landing just a little behind. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I exhaled slowly and continued walking. My steps pressed into the soft ground, each one met by a faint echo just moments after, not mimicking, following. By the time I returned near the church, the night air had grown colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something older. I stepped onto the church path again, and the footsteps behind me fell silent. I turned. Nothing. Yet the cold in the air shifted, circling around me like unseen hands brushing past. A whisper rose, not from one place, but all around. Not yet. The word carried a tone almost human, almost mournful. Not yet. I steadied myself and reached for the lantern at the edge of the path. The flame inside flickered weakly, casting trembling patterns across the ground. As I lifted it, I saw footprints not far from where I stood. Human ones, fresh ones, leading away from the church, away from the marsh, deeper into the village. My breath caught. Someone else was here, someone alive. I followed the footprints slowly, lantern raised. They led between two collapsed homes, through a narrow passageway, and into a small clearing behind the village school. The building still stood, though its roof had sunken inward and its windows were covered in grime. The footprints stopped at the door. Fresh mud smeared along the wood. I leaned close. The door was slightly open. A faint glow pulsed from within, though no light should have been inside. I pushed the door gently, just enough to see. The glow came from the far side of the classroom. A lantern sat on a desk, lit by a flame far too steady for the draught that swept through the broken windows, and sitting beside it, hunched over a scattered pile of papers, was someone, a silhouette, motionless, facing away from me, shoulders trembling as though sobbing, or breathing in a rhythm not meant for human lungs. The figure slowly turned its head, too slowly, far too slowly, enough for me to hear the soft sound of joints bending in a way joints should never bend. And then I saw its eyes, not pale, not white, but hollow, completely hollow, as though the marsh had emptied them out long ago. I froze. The hollow-eyed figure remained seated, rocking slightly as if aware of me, but unwilling to acknowledge my presence fully. The papers scattered around it whispered in the breeze of my lantern, rustling like dry leaves. Each sheet carried drawings, symbols, sketches of circles, interlaced with lines that seemed to stretch toward nothing. I stepped closer. The air grew heavier, almost viscous. It pressed against my chest, against my lungs, against the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I could hear a soft hum now, rising from the walls themselves, low and steady, not mechanical, not natural. I realized it wasn't just the walls. It was the village. Greybridge hummed. Each house, each broken beam, each waterlogged street sang in a frequency almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. It was a resonance that carried through the marrow of my bones. I understood then the village wasn't abandoned. It was listening. It had always been listening. I tried to speak, to ask the figure if it was human or something else, but no words came. My throat tightened, and a shiver ran from the base of my skull to the tips of my fingers. The figure tilted its head, and I saw that its mouth was missing, not shaped incorrectly, not hidden, missing. Smooth wood-like flesh replaced it, seamless and unbroken. The lantern flickered. The glow caught the figure's hands. They were small, delicate, pale, and they were not touching the ground. They hovered slightly, as if suspended by something unseen, and around its wrists, thin lines of shadows curled outward, drifting like smoke toward the walls. I stepped back instinctively. The floor beneath me groaned in response. Or perhaps it was the building itself groaning, whispering in reply. I couldn't tell. Then the paper stirred again. A single sheet lifted, spinning in the air toward me. Symbols scrawled across it glowed faintly in the lantern light, circles overlapping with other circles, lines like threads reaching outward. I could almost hear them forming words if I listened closely enough. The word repeated in my mind, not aloud, but directly inside my skull. Return. I stumbled backward, my foot hitting a chair. The figure did not move. The lantern swayed violently in my hand, casting jagged shadows across the walls. And then I heard it, a whisper, low and far away, coming from behind the walls, not human, not animal. It spoke my name, and then, not yet. I spun, trying to locate the sound. The classroom walls were bare, rotting wood and plaster, yet from them the whispers came. Layered voices, echoing, overlapping, some urgent, some pleading, some amused, some patient. I realized then the figure wasn't alone. They were all around me. Pale shapes pressed against the walls, their hollow eyes fixed on me through time and space. They didn't move fully into the room, they never did. But the sense of them was undeniable, watching, waiting, listening. I took a step toward the door, the floorboards shifted. A groan, low and deliberate, like the bones of the village itself had decided to impede me. The figure rose, slowly, and its body elongated, stretching in a way that shouldn't be possible. The shadows at its wrists slithered along the floor, connecting with the floorboards, connecting with the walls. The air vibrated around me. The hum became louder, a chorus of unseen mouths murmuring a language I couldn't recognize but understood in part. Belong, return, come back. My heart pounded. My thoughts became jagged shards. Every instinct screamed to leave, but another voice, one buried beneath panic, curiosity and dread, whispered, "Follow." I forced myself to breathe. I reminded myself of Harris's warnings. I reminded myself of every old tale I had heard. Greybridge was not just a village. It was a trap. It was a mirror. It was a hunger that waited silently for a soul brave or foolish enough to walk inside. The hollow-eyed figure tilted its head again. A sound passed through the room, deep and resonant, like the tolling of a bell underwater. The walls pulsed with each echo, and in that pulse I felt my own heartbeat align with theirs. I realized then it wanted me to walk into the village, deeper, not out. Against every instinct I followed. The footprints I had seen earlier continued past the school, muddy tracks leading through narrow alleys formed by collapsed houses. The reeds grew taller, denser. Mist pooled in depressions in the ground, curling like fingers along the edges of waterlogged paths. I passed a house with its door torn away completely. Inside, something stirred. Shadows moved like curtains in windless air. The smell of damp earth and decay grew stronger, mixed with something sweet, almost like rot blooming into flower. And then I saw the first grave, small, unassuming, barely marked. A single stone slab, sunken, covered in moss, a circle carved into its top. One of the uneven, incomplete circles I had seen everywhere. I crouched to examine it. The soil around it was soft, fresh, not from time. Something had moved it recently, then a sound behind me. Not footsteps, not whispers, but breathing. Heavy, slow, expectant. I turned. Nothing. The grave before me seemed to shift slightly, the circle more distinct, carved deeper than I remembered. The air trembled. I sensed something under the ground move, unseen, patient, aware. The figure was not here, but it had not left. I felt it in the air, pressing gently, not violently, around my skin. Not chasing, not attacking, waiting. I knew then that the marsh, the village, the hollow-eyed shapes, they were not alive in the way humans are, but they were alive in a way older, slower, and infinitely patient. They remembered the people who once lived here. They remembered the rituals, the symbols, the fear, and they remembered the ones who wandered too close, and they did not forget. I stood, brushing mud from my hands. The mist thickened. The reeds rustled behind me, and in the darkness between the broken homes I saw a faint glow moving, not the lantern I carried, something else. A faint, pulsating light, like a heartbeat reflected in the mist. It beckoned, it waited, and it called again, not yet, but I knew it wanted me to come closer. I stepped forward, and the marsh seemed to breathe around me. I followed the faint light, moving cautiously through the marsh. Each step sank slightly into the wet earth, each one leaving an imprint that seemed to disappear almost immediately. The mist curled around me, thickening as I approached the center of the village, carrying with it the smell of wet wood, old earth, and that faintly sweet metallic tang I had noticed before. The houses here were more intact than those I had passed, but only just. Their roofs sagged, walls twisted slightly as if leaning in to observe me. Windows gaped like empty eye sockets, and doors hung ajar, inviting and warning at the same time. The light flickered again, pulsing in a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. I moved closer. It led me to a small square at the center of Greybridge, where the remnants of the town hall still stood. Its doors were missing entirely, and the interior was dark, save for the faint glow seeping from the cracks in the walls. The air here was thick, heavy, almost tactile. It pressed against my chest with every breath, demanding attention, demanding acknowledgement. I stepped inside. The glow came from a series of objects arranged carefully on the floor. Candles, though they burned with a strange, cold flame, circled a wooden chest. The chest itself was unremarkable at first glance, but the symbols carved into its lid caught my eye. Overlapping circles, open and incomplete, like eyes staring through time. The hollow-eyed figure appeared again, standing at the far side of the hall. Not fully formed, more shadow than substance, yet present enough to command attention. It raised its arm once more, pointing toward the chest. I approached slowly. Each step felt deliberate, weighted by the presence that clung to the walls, the floors, and the air itself. The hum of the village rose, growing louder with each movement, resonating through my bones, and the whispers returned, layered and overlapping. Return, belong, remember. I knelt before the chest. The carving seemed to writhe beneath my gaze. I could almost hear the words spoken aloud, the stories of Greybridge, The people, their fears, their rituals, their surrender. The chest wasn't locked. The lid lifted easily. Inside were dozens of objects, small trinkets, faded photographs, pieces of clothing, letters, items that had belonged to those who had lived here. The air smelled of time, of memory itself. I reached for one of the letters. The paper was delicate, brittle, yet strangely warm. The writing was almost unreadable, faded to a ghostly grey, but a single sentence was clear. We tried to stop it. We failed. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I looked up at the figure. Its hollow eyes were fixed on me. It did not speak, yet I understood. The marsh had claimed them. The village had surrendered. The people here had become part of something far older, something patient and waiting beneath the reeds and the water. The hum of the village grew insistent, almost urgent. I felt it pressing against my mind, tugging at memories I didn't recognize, pulling me closer to the chest, closer to the light. And then I heard it, a whisper, low and unmistakable, carrying across the hall, "Stay." I staggered back, clutching the chest lid. The figure did not advance. It simply watched. The light flickered, revealing shapes in the corners of the room, pale figures pressed against the walls, leaning toward me, listening, waiting. Outside, the wind through the reeds shifted. A faint call rose from the marsh, low and melodic, like a song remembered from childhood. The footsteps I had heard before returned, soft and deliberate, tracing my own movements, yet always a step behind. I realized with a sinking certainty that Greybridge was not empty. It never had been. The village remembered. The village waited. And it had been waiting for me. The chest before me seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the marsh itself. I understood then that it was not just a repository of objects, but a doorway, a vessel, a memory made tangible, a call for me to remember what had been lost. I lifted the chest fully, its weight surprisingly heavy, and stepped toward the door. The figure followed, gliding silently behind me, the shadows at its wrists stretching toward the walls, connecting with the wooden beams, the floorboards, the remnants of the town. Outside, the mist had thickened further, rising in slow waves from the marsh. The reeds whispered against one another, carrying messages I could almost understand. The call from beneath the water came again, long and low, calling my name, urging me forward. I moved through the village, the chest heavy in my arms. Houses leaned closer, the whispers growing more insistent. The figures pressed against the walls followed, indistinct, patient. Their hollow eyes never left me. The path through the village narrowed, leading toward the deepest part of the marsh. I could see the dark water ahead, smooth and waiting, reflecting the pale light of the moon, and then I understood. The village had not vanished. It had become part of the marsh. The marsh had absorbed its people, its memories, its rituals, and it would absorb anyone who ventured too far, anyone who carried their stories too willingly into the night. The water before me rippled. A single circle formed at the surface, uneven, incomplete, pulsing with a faint glow. The chest vibrated in my hands as if responding to the circle. The hollow-eyed figure raised its arm once more, pointing toward the water. Not at me, not away. Toward the circle, I took a step forward, and the marsh seemed to lean closer. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if the village itself were speaking through the reeds, the water, the earth. Return, belong, remember. The chest in my arms seemed to pulse in time with the marsh. The figures in the walls leaned further, the hollow-eyed figure waiting silently, eternally patient, and I realized then, with a clarity that made my breath catch, that the choice was not mine to make. The marsh, the village, the hollow-eyed figures, they had been waiting for someone to remember, someone to carry the stories, someone to continue the ritual. I stepped closer to the circle, and the water seemed to rise to meet me. The circle in the water pulsed faintly, unevenly, as if it were breathing. The chest in my arms throbbed with a weight I could feel in my bones rather than in my hands. The mist rose around me in slow, curling waves, each one carrying with it the faint scent of earth and something older, something that had waited centuries beneath the surface. I stepped closer. The hollow-eyed figure remained at the edge of the village, silent, motionless, watching. The other shapes pressed against the walls of the abandoned buildings leaned forward slightly, their pale forms shimmering in the moonlight, as though the very fabric of Greybridge strained to see me, to test me, to know if I belonged. The circle pulsed again. A faint ripple spread across the water's surface, and with it, an unmistakable sensation, something waiting, just beneath the dark, smooth surface. The chest seemed to vibrate in response, a rhythm, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat. I lowered the chest toward the water. The surface rippled faster, trembling as if sensing the intent. The mist thickened, and the reeds bent inward, almost brushing my shoulders, whispering around me with soft, sibilant voices. The chest's weight increased. My arms strained. Yet I did not hesitate. A faint glow rose from beneath the circle. The water was no longer flat. It rippled and heaved, reflecting shapes I could not name, faces blurred and stretched, as though remembered incorrectly by someone half asleep. Eyes blinked from beneath the water, pale and hollow, not threatening, but patient. Expectant. The hum of the village rose into a chorus. The whispers layered over one another. Not yet. Belong. Remember. Return. Not yet. I set the chest onto the water. It floated. A little. The symbols carved into its lid pulsed faintly, aligning with the circles etched into the marsh, the village, and the old markers I had seen along the paths. A pattern emerged, and I understood that the chest was not simply a container. It was a key, a vessel for memory, a doorway. The water trembled. From beneath the circle, shapes began to rise, not fully formed. Shadows at first, drifting, stretching into forms I recognized vaguely as human, yet twisted by time and the weight of memory. Figures that were thin and elongated, faces smooth, mouths missing, eyes hollow. Familiar shapes pressed forward from the water's depths. The hollow-eyed figure at the edge of the village began to move, slowly, deliberately, across the wet mud. The shadows in the water followed its rhythm, mirroring it, stretching, bending, moving as one. I realized then that they were not coming to harm me. They were waiting for me to act, waiting for me to acknowledge them, waiting for the ritual to continue. The chest trembled. Symbols along its edges glowed brighter. I placed a hand on its lid. The hum of the marsh, the whispers of the village, and the low, soft breathing beneath the water all merged into a single pulse. I felt a memory flow into me, not mine, not entirely, but part of Greybridge. Centuries of lives, of rituals, of waiting. The water before me parted slightly, rippling outward in concentric circles. A figure rose fully, though its edges shimmered and wavered. Pale, hollow-eyed, mouth absent, hands floating, wrists bound in curling shadows that reached toward the chest. It did not speak, it did not move aggressively. It waited. And I understood. This was the first of many. Not a threat, not an enemy. A guide, a witness, a memory embodied. The hum deepened. The whispers intensified. The water surged, lifting the chest slightly. I stepped closer, my hand steadied despite the weight in my chest, and touched the surface of the chest to the water. The surface parted fully then, not violently but deliberately. Shadows writhed beneath, indistinct, alive in a way that defied logic. Pale hands emerged, not to grasp me, but to meet the chest. The chest rose higher, aligning with the circle of light beneath the water, and then, slowly, the chest sank, not into water, but into something deeper, something unseen. The hollow-eyed figure remained behind me, the reeds whispered, and I felt the pulse of Greybridge itself, deep and eternal, accepting what had been offered. A silence fell, not empty, but full of waiting, of memory, of something older than the village. The chest disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only the faintest ripple. The glow beneath the water dimmed. The figures in the water receded, dissolving into mist. The shapes pressed against the walls of the village leaned back, their hollow eyes fading. The hum dropped to a low, steady heartbeat, echoing through the marsh. I stepped back onto solid ground. The mist thinned slightly. The night seemed less heavy. The village, the marsh, the figures, they had accepted what I had given. For now, the hollow-eyed figure remained at the edge of the water, motionless. I could feel it watching, patient, eternal, waiting for another to follow, another to remember, another to belong. I turned back toward the road, toward the path I had come. The first light of dawn touched the tops of the reeds. Greybridge lay silent, as though asleep, as though nothing had stirred for centuries. But I knew the truth. The village remembered. The marsh waited, and the ritual, old as memory itself, continued in quiet patience, waiting for the next soul brave, or foolish, enough to follow. I left Greybridge behind, the echoes of its whispers lingering in my mind. I walked slowly along the path, each step lighter than the last, but the memory of the hollow-eyed figures, the circles, the hum of the village, and the pulse beneath the marsh remained, always present, always waiting. I never returned, not fully, and sometimes, when the wind is right and the night is deep, I hear my name carried across the marsh. Not loud, not clear, not quite real. And I know that Greybridge remembers me. I did not stop walking. The village lay behind me, but the marsh seemed to follow. The reeds swayed without wind, brushing against my arms like long, pale fingers. Every step forward carried the faint echo of hollow-eyed figures, not chasing me, not threatening, but present, patient, eternal. The chest I had offered to the water was gone. The glow beneath the surface had vanished, leaving the marsh smooth, dark, and deceptively still. But I knew it was not empty, not silent, not gone. I moved along a narrow path that led deeper into the marsh, where the water pooled thickly between the reeds. My lantern cast weak light, stretching shadows that seemed to tremble, moving slightly, as though alive. I remembered Harris's words, the old surveyor who had warned me. Greybridge is patient. Greybridge waits. And Greybridge remembers. At first I had thought it was a warning. Now I understood it was a truth. The mist thickened further. Shapes began to form in the distance, dark, leaning shapes like the remnants of buildings half sunk into the earth. I recognized them as the older parts of the village, places even Harris had not mentioned. They had been swallowed gradually, piece by piece, by the marsh, leaving only shadows and echoes. As I approached, I noticed something strange. The shapes were not entirely solid. They wavered slightly, like reflections in disturbed water. Yet I could hear soft noises, the creak of old wood, faint laughter, the whisper of voices that seemed familiar, though I could not place them. I realized then that the village itself was not dead. It was a memory made physical, a living echo of those who had once walked its streets, and the marsh had preserved it, holding it, shaping it, feeding it with time and patience. A sudden movement caught my eye. A pale figure emerged from the fog ahead, hollow eyes, mouth absent, arms hanging loosely, wrists curling with those faint shadow lines I had seen before. It did not move toward me. It did not speak. But it pointed ahead, toward a small clearing where the reeds parted. I followed, hesitant, heart thudding. The air felt heavier, denser. Each step pressed against my chest. The clearing was different. Here, the water was shallower, reflecting the pale moonlight like a mirror, and in the center stood a structure unlike any I had seen, a circular stone foundation, partially sunken into the earth, surrounded by small mounds and carved markers. Symbols, carved deeply into stone, echoed the circles I had seen throughout the village. This was the heart of Greybridge. I stepped closer. The hollow-eyed figure remained at the edge of the clearing, watching silently. Then, slowly, more shapes emerged from the mist. Others like it, pale, hollow-eyed, some floating slightly above the ground, some gliding on the water. They did not speak. They did not threaten. They simply waited. The hum rose again. subtle at first, then louder, layering into a chorus. The whispers returned, overlapping. Return. Belong. Remember. Not yet. I knelt near the stone foundation. The carvings on the stones glowed faintly under the moonlight, pulsing with a rhythm I recognized from the chest and the circle in the water. I pressed my hand against one of the stones. It was cold, solid, but beneath it I felt a vibration, a slow heartbeat, a pulse older than the village itself. Memories, fragments of lives long gone flowed into my mind, faces blurred with age, voices faint but persistent, calling, singing, whispering, children laughing, mothers speaking softly, men walking the streets, all gone, all preserved in the marsh, all waiting. The hollow-eyed figure stepped forward. Its movement was fluid, unnatural, yet deliberate. It raised an arm toward the foundation. Others followed, forming a circle around the stone heart. Their shadowed wrists stretched outward, connecting to the carvings, the ground, the earth itself. I understood what they wanted. It was not violence. It was continuity, memory, ritual. I pressed my hands against the stone. The vibration increased. The whispers coalesced into something almost intelligible. Remember us, carry us, belong, the marsh responded. The water rippled, the reeds swayed in slow waves, and the mist thickened further, curling around my body. I could feel the presence of the village, patient and eternal, alive in a way that defied logic. And in that moment I realized I was no longer a visitor. I was part of the memory now, part of the ritual, part of Greybridge. Not fully. Not yet. The hollow-eyed figure nodded slowly, deliberately. Others followed. The pulse of the stones, the marsh, the reeds, the mist. They all aligned. A rhythm older than any living thing. A heartbeat of memory. I stepped back from the foundation, hands trembling. The figures receded slightly, blending with the mist, their watchful hollow eyes lingering. The whispers faded into the soft hum of the marsh. I could leave. I could walk away. But I knew I would never fully escape Greybridge, because memory is patient, because the marsh waits, because the village remembers, and I was now part of its story. The night pressed close around me. The mist clung to my skin, wet and cold, carrying the scent of earth, water, and something older I could not name. The marsh was alive in ways I could feel but could not see. Every rustle of reeds, every ripple across the water, every soft whisper seemed deliberate, patient, eternal. I returned to the stone foundation. The hollow-eyed figures had not left. They lingered, patient and motionless, surrounding the heart of Greybridge like guardians of memory. Others hovered in the mist beyond, watching silently, shadows stretching toward me and the stones. I knelt again, hands pressed to the carvings. The pulse beneath them had grown stronger. The whispers returned, layered and overlapping, almost pleading. Remember, belong, return. Not yet. The words sank into my mind, not heard, felt like the slow pull of water against the shore, like a current I could not resist. I traced the circles with my fingers, following their uneven lines. The carvings were warm beneath my touch, almost alive. And then I noticed something I had not before. Small impressions, footprints pressed into the earth around the foundation. Not human, not child, not fully animal. And yet they were deliberate, leading in a circle around the stones. I realized with a sinking certainty that this was the center of the ritual. The marsh, the village, the hollow-eyed figures, they were waiting for it to be completed, waiting for someone to carry it forward. A soft glow emerged from the water pooling nearby. Pale shapes rose slowly, one by one, drifting toward the foundation, their arms stretched, hands connecting with the carvings, their hollow eyes fixed on me, patient, expectant. I stood, unsteady, aware that every step, every motion, was part of the ritual now. I could not turn back. Not fully. Greybridge had already claimed a piece of me. already woven me into its memory. The hollow-eyed figure at the edge of the foundation stepped forward. Its movements were fluid, unnatural. Its arm extended toward me, not in threat, but in instruction. Toward the water, toward the chest I had offered, toward the pulse beneath the stones. I understood what I was meant to do. Not to resist, not to flee, but to act, to become part of the cycle, to remember and carry what Greybridge could not fully release on its own. I moved slowly toward the water. The mist thickened further, curling around my legs like pale hands. The glow beneath the surface intensified, reflecting off the stones, the reeds, the pale forms of the figures surrounding me. I knelt by the water's edge. The surface rippled gently. The circle pulsed, faint but insistent. I extended my hands over the water, feeling the cold seep through my fingers, and then I realized the chest was beneath the surface now, carried there by the marsh itself. It was waiting for me. I lifted it, heavy with memory and time. Symbols on the lid glowed faintly in response to the pulse of the circle. The hollow-eyed figures mirrored my movements, their hands raised slightly, wrists curling as they connected with the carvings in the water. I placed the chest back into the circle. It floated briefly, then sank slightly, settling perfectly into the heart of the marsh. The water around it shimmered, reflecting the pale light of the moon and the glow of the carvings. The hum of the village intensified. The whispers rose into a chorus, a song of memory and ritual, repeating in layered voices. Belong, remember, return. Not yet. The figures moved closer. Their forms shimmered, sometimes solid, sometimes fading into mist. They reached toward the chest, not to claim it, but to complete the cycle. The marsh responded, rippling and pulsing in perfect rhythm with the carvings and the stones. I stepped back, breath trembling. The ritual was happening, alive in the water, the stones, the marsh, and the figures. And I was part of it. Not fully, not yet, but present. The hollow-eyed figure at the edge of the foundation raised its arm one final time. The circle in the water pulsed brighter. Shapes rose from beneath the surface, pale, thin, hollow-eyed, hands reaching out to the stones. The whispers became clear, almost a language I could understand. You carry us now. I felt it. The weight of centuries, the memories of lives long gone, the patience of the marsh, the village, and the hollow-eyed figures. They flowed into me, not all at once, but gradually, a rhythm of memory and time. The mist swirled faster. The reeds bent toward the stones, toward the circle, toward the chest. The figures hummed with the pulse of the village, and I understood something I had not before. Greybridge did not vanish. It persisted. It endured. And now, I was part of its endurance. I stepped back from the water. The mist began to thin slightly, the glow faded, the whispers softened. The hollow-eyed figures receded into the shadows, returning to the walls, to the reeds, to the marsh itself. The heartbeat beneath the stones slowed, settling into a quiet rhythm. The village was silent again. Not empty, never empty, just patient, watching, remembering, waiting. I turned and walked away, the path back to the road clear now. The marsh rippled gently behind me. Greybridge remained, patient and eternal, a memory preserved in earth, water, and mist, and I carried a part of it with me. I left the marsh behind, but I did not leave it entirely. The road back was narrow, winding, overgrown in places. The mist clung to the ground, and the reeds whispered softly as I passed. The village was behind me, yet I could feel its presence pressing gently, like a hand resting on the edge of my mind. The pulse beneath the stones, the circle in the water, the hollow-eyed figures, they were all still with me. I tried to focus on ordinary things, the crunch of mud beneath my boots, the cold air against my cheeks, the distant stars peeking through the night sky. Yet nothing could fully separate me from Greybridge. I began to hear things, faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind, a soft rhythmic hum, like the pulse of the village itself, echoing in my mind. Footsteps behind me that never aligned with my own, a whisper of my name, carried in the night air just at the edge of hearing. Sleep became difficult. Dreams came unbidden, vivid and strange. I would awaken to find myself back in the marsh, the stone foundation at the center, the hollow-eyed figures watching silently. Sometimes I could feel the weight of their gaze pressing through the fog of dreams into my waking mind. I began to notice things around me that were impossible. Shadows that lingered too long. Reeds swaying where there was no wind. Soft ripples in puddles, forming imperfect circles. Objects I had touched in Greybridge appearing in my home, small, insignificant things. A stone, a faded paper, a tiny carving, that I could not explain. The memory of the village grew heavy in my thoughts. I remembered the faces of those long gone, not fully human, not fully memory, hollow eyes, silent mouths, waiting, patient, watching, and always the pull, remember, belong, return. I realized then that leaving Greybridge was not enough. It was not a place you could truly abandon. It entered you, wound itself around your thoughts, your dreams, your senses. It made itself part of your memory so that you would carry it forward. I began keeping a journal. Every detail, every symbol, every whisper I could recall, I wrote down. Circles, overlapping lines, uneven, incomplete, scattered in patterns that seemed to pulse as I wrote. The words themselves began to hum faintly on the page, as though the village remembered my handwriting and approved, or disapproved. Friends and colleagues noticed changes in me, subtle at first, pauses in speech, eyes that lingered too long on empty spaces, hesitation where there should have been certainty. I brushed it off, attributing it to fatigue, imagination, stress. But I knew the truth. Greybridge was with me, not in a way that could be easily seen, not in a way that could be proven, but present, watching, patient, waiting. One night I dreamed of the hollow-eyed figures in the mist. They stood in a circle around the stone foundation, hands raised, wrists curling, connecting to one another, and the water, the stones, the earth itself. Their whispers rose in layered voices. Remember, belong, return. Not yet. And then I saw myself walking among them. Not resisting, not fleeing. Part of the rhythm, part of the memory. The marsh pulsed beneath my feet. The stones vibrated through my hands, and I realized the ritual was not complete, not fully. I awoke in a sweat, the hum still echoing faintly in my room. The memory of the village pressing against my mind like a weight. The chest, long gone beneath the circle, had left something behind, a trace, a part of Greybridge embedded in my thoughts, in my perception of the world. I began to see signs everywhere. Circles, imperfect, incomplete, etched into the patterns of trees, the rings of puddles, the cracks in walls. Small things, almost imperceptible, yet familiar. Whispered invitations, subtle, patient. Not commands, not threats. I understood then that the marsh did not need me to return physically. It only needed me to remember, to carry it forward, to preserve its memory. And so I did, every day, every step, every thought, every dream. Greybridge lived in me and through me. Not fully conscious, not fully aware, but patient, waiting, observing. The hollow-eyed figures became part of my peripheral vision in fleeting moments. The pulse beneath the stones echoed in my chest. The whisper of my name lingered just beyond hearing. The world continued as it always had, ordinary, mundane, human. Yet beneath it, beneath the thin veil of normalcy, the village endured, a patient memory, waiting for its next ritual, waiting for its next visitor, waiting for its next keeper, and I carried it with me, willingly. The days blurred into nights. Time became an uneven rhythm, measured less by hours than by the pulse of memory I carried with me. Greybridge was never far. The village, the marsh, the hollow-eyed figures, they were present in my thoughts, in the rustle of the wind, in the ripple of every puddle. I tried to live normally. Walk streets, enter stores, speak with friends, yet even in the mundane I saw traces, a circle in cracked pavement, the curve of a puddle's edge, a shadow that lingered too long. All of them whispered in the same language, familiar yet alien. Remember, belong, return. Not yet. The chest I had left beneath the marsh haunted me in memory. I could see it glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the stone foundation. I knew it was not a memory alone, it was a tether, connecting me to the village, the marsh, the cycle of ritual that never truly ended. Night became a threshold I feared and anticipated. In sleep I returned to Greybridge. I walked the stone foundation, followed the hollow-eyed figures through mist, felt the reeds brush against my hands, heard the low hum rising from the marsh. I would awaken, and still, the pulse remained beneath my ribs, subtle but insistent. I began to see others in my waking life. People with hollow eyes, figures fleeting at the edge of vision, watching, patient, silent. Not threatening, but expectant. And always the circle, imperfect, incomplete, waiting to be traced, waiting to be remembered. One evening I returned to a small creek near my home. The water was shallow, reflecting the moon, and yet, beneath the surface I thought I saw the faint glow, the chest. The marsh's pulse, the village's memory, reached across time and space, calling me. I knelt, hand trembling, but nothing rose, only reflection, only memory. I understood then that the pull was not physical. Greybridge did not need me to return, it only needed me to carry it, to remember, to keep the cycle alive. The whisper followed me constantly now, soft, patient, at times almost soothing, at times pressing like the weight of water on my chest. Return, belong, remember. Not yet. The hollow-eyed figures became more vivid in dreams. They walked among me, silent observers, shadows stretching unnaturally, watching my every move. Sometimes I woke to the faint impression of their presence in my room, lingering in corners, in mirrors, in reflections on the glass of windows. The cycle of ritual became embedded in my mind. Symbols, circles, overlapping lines. They appeared in my handwriting, in notes, in sketches. I traced them absent-mindedly on paper, walls, and even the ground outside, unaware if I was dreaming or awake. Greybridge was no longer a place. It was a memory, a rhythm, a pull that existed wherever I existed. And then I realized the truth. It did not want me to return to the village physically. It wanted me to become its memory, its keeper, its witness. To carry the pulse, the whisper, the rhythm of Greybridge into the world. I had tried to resist. I had tried to separate myself. But the marsh, the village, and the hollow-eyed figures had been patient for centuries. They were not thwarted by distance. They were not swayed by reason. They only waited for someone to accept. And I had accepted. I walked slowly, always aware of the whisper at the edge of hearing, the faint pulse beneath my ribs, the soft tug at the corners of perception. Greybridge had become a part of me. I carried the memory of the stone foundation, the chest beneath the water, the imperfect circles, the hollow-eyed figures, the mist, and the pulse of the marsh everywhere. Not fully conscious, not fully aware, but always present. The ritual was ongoing, endless, patient, waiting, and I was now part of it. Time had changed its shape. I no longer measured days in hours. I measured them in the pull of memory, the whisper at the edge of thought, the pulse beneath my chest that beat in time with the stones, the chest, the marsh. Greybridge had become part of me, and I had become part of Greybridge. The hollow-eyed figures visited me less often, yet their presence remained. Shadows in the corner of a room, the curve of a puddle reflecting an imperfect circle, the faint, rhythmic hum in the night. Not threatening, not aggressive, patient, observant, expectant. I sometimes walked alone at night, drawn to bodies of water, to patches of reeds, to the faint smell of damp earth. Every so often the glow beneath the surface called me, a pulse I could feel in my bones, subtle, insistent. It was never the chest anymore. It was the memory of it. The pulse of Greybridge carried in me, alive, patient, eternal. I traced the imperfect circles wherever I could, on paper, in dirt, on walls. Each line connected me to the marsh, to the village, to the rhythm I now carried. Sometimes, in the faint mist of dreams, I would return fully, standing on the stone foundation, surrounded by the hollow-eyed figures, tracing the carvings, feeling the pulse beneath the stones. The marsh waits, the village waits, the ritual continues. I realized the hollow-eyed figures were not guides, not teachers, not guardians in the sense humans understand. They were reminders, witnesses, keepers of patience, of memory, of time. They did not demand, they did not coerce. They waited. And the marsh, the stones, the circle, they were patient too, eternal. Sometimes when I stand near water or in fog or at the edge of silence, I hear the whispers again. My name, carried faintly on the wind, layered over other names, other memories, other lives once lost to the marsh. And the pulse beneath my chest responds, I no longer resist, I no longer flee. I have accepted my role, however quietly, however subtly, as the keeper. Not of the village itself, not of the marsh, but of the memory, the ritual, the endless patience. I walk among the living carrying the pulse, the hum, the whisper of Greybridge in my mind. Sometimes I see shadows at the edge of vision. Sometimes the imperfect circles appear unexpectedly. Sometimes the mist curls in the corner of a room, or the water ripples in unnatural rhythm. I know then that Greybridge remembers me always, always patient, always waiting, and I will remember forever. The village has endured, the marsh has endured, and through me, so does the pulse, the memory, the whisper. I am part of it now, and it is part of me.